So you remember roughly what we did last time. Notice that in the Art Scroll translation, you have the translation of Rashi, which isn't the translation of everybody else, but it is Rashi's translation. In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth. Now, don't just trust the English. How would you punctuate? If you put it in a punctuation mark at this point, how would you punctuate? In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth.
After Bereshis.
How would you punctuate the end of this verse? What punctuation mark would you put, if any, would you put at the end of verse 1? If you translate it the way it's translated in this book, okay, maybe a comma, but certainly not a period, because it's not a full sentence.
Right.
It's a dependent clause. Right? I mean, is this obvious to everybody?
Right.
Okay. They did very well here. They put a dash. Okay? So you're in the middle of a sentence. When the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and divine presence hovered over the surface of the waters. Punctuation? No, you're still in a dependent clause. The first two verses create just a dependent clause. God said, let there be light, and there was light. Period. The period comes at the end of verse 3. The first action that takes place is the action of creating light, which is exactly what Rashi said. That's why Rashi said that the verse is not coming to teach you the order of creation in the sense, I heard somebody say this wrongly a couple of weeks ago, so in the sense of telling you what happened at time 0. It's not coming to tell you what happened at time 0. It is teaching the order of the events thereafter. What's happened in days 2 happened after day 1. It's not as if the whole first chapter is out of order, but it's not teaching the initiation of the process. And that's what Rashi proved with his arguments against the critic. And as we said, he started off by saying that these words need midrashic treatment, meaning to doresh, to demand, to investigate, because there's a problem that's facing you. And we saw that he gave pride of place to the rabbinic drush and from the Talmudic times. And then he said, but I'm going to be doresh to find the pshat, and the pshat is entirely different. And as far as our literature tells us, Rashi is the first one to mention this pshat. No, it's not. It doesn't appear anywhere else before him. Okay, now let's go to verse 4. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated between the light and the darkness. So Rashi says, this is what you have on the page, here too we need the words of the Agada. Agada is another word for a midrashic type of material. Here too, meaning just like I told you in verse 1, we need it here also. Well, let's see. What's the problem? So any problem with the grammar here? God saw the light was good, separated the light and the darkness. I don't know of any grammatical problems here, so that's not what's driving Rashi. We need a Agadic interpretation because something in the verse is not understood. Anything appear to you as needing explanation here? Yeah.
What does it mean it was good? What does it mean by good?
Okay, that's an interesting question. What does it mean by good? That is asked by the commentaries, especially when you get to the end of the first chapter when it says God saw everything that he made and it was very good. That's an interesting question. But that's not what's driving Rashi here. Yeah.
Possible that why would there be darkness? If he says let there be light, then where's the darkness coming from?
Okay, but now go back and look at verse 2.
Oh, darkness on the surface of the
Yeah, so the darkness was there. But why is seeing that it's good a reason to separate it from the darkness? What's one thing got to do with the other? The verse is clearly saying he saw that it was good, and therefore, not just therefore he separated it. What is seeing that it's good got to do with separating it? Now, Rashi is going to give two explanations, one midrashic and one pshat. But to understand why one is midrashic and one is pshat, so let's see what Rashi says. He saw that it was not proper for the wicked to use it, so he separated for the righteous in the future. That is to say, he separated it out of the world. He took it out of the world. Because it was good, it's not appropriate that those who are not good should use it. And some people are going to be not qualified to be called good. So he made it unavailable to them by taking it out of the world altogether. That's the midrashic interpretation. According to its pshat, explained as follows. He saw that it was good, and it was unseemly that the light and the darkness should serve in confusion, mixed together. So he established for this one its boundary by day, and for that one its boundary by night. So here you need, in other words, one thing that Rashi is counting on is that the next verse says that he saw the light was good, and he called the light day and the darkness night. So he's putting it in context. But the fact that it's good means that it shouldn't be mixed with things that aren't good. And you see, we live in the world where light and darkness are fairly separated naturally. But this process, there was darkness there, and God created light. Where did he create it? The picture you could have is that the first appearance of light created a kind of twilight. Twilight is like light and darkness mixed together. It's semi-light. So, but then that means that the good is functioning together with the not good. Now, then that becomes a reason for separating, and that's not obvious. It's not obvious. Maybe you would say, let the good and the not good function together, so the good will hold on to the not good, preserve it from becoming worse, will have an influence on it to improve it, and so forth and so on. You know, you could have said that. But no, the pasuk is telling you, because he saw it was good, he separated them. Now, this has a certain gigantic implication. You all know that in the Garden of Eden there was a tree which God said not to eat from. What was that tree called? Tree of knowledge of good and evil. What does that mean? Does that mean the tree of knowledge of good, comma, and knowledge of evil, period? Just two things to know? Or is the knowledge of good and evil mixed?
Good and evil mixed.
And it could be read that way. It's a tree of knowledge of good and evil mixed. Here, the good was separated from the dark. So they shouldn't be mishamish together. By eating from the tree of knowledge, you restore the interaction between the good and the evil. You're going back to something which God created on the first day of creation. God corrected on the first day of creation. That gives it a very dramatic meaning. So he, so to speak, pulled them apart. Now, the first one, he says, midrashic, that God took the light out of the world. That's not registered in the continuation of the verses at all. The next verse said God called to the light day and called to the darkness light, called to the darkness night. Day and night continue on, day after day, right? There's no hint here that some light was taken out of the world. So it's not going to be what he calls pshat. So then the question is, why does Rashi feel a need for it? Why isn't Rashi satisfied with the pshat? And I think that the reason why Rashi is not satisfied with the pshat is because, according to the pshat, saying, as I said about 90 seconds ago, saying that it's good, and then saying, well, then it shouldn't serve together with something that's not good, so I have to separate them, that's just not obvious logically. Could be so, but it's not obvious logically. As I said, maybe the good should be connected to the evil, or to the not good, and have a hashpah and have an effect on it. Here's another place where this comes up in this week's parsha, when Abraham is accompanied when he comes to the land of Israel by his nephew Lot, and then they go down to Egypt, and then they come up from Egypt, and then there's the whole separation between them because there's competition between their herds and their shepherds and their visions of what they want for the land. And Abraham says, please separate from me, and they separate. And then it says, after Lot separated from Abraham, God spoke to him, to Abraham. And Chazal say, God didn't speak to him while the evil Lot was with him. Now, I think we can understand this from Abraham's point of view. He's going to preach the truth to the world. He's going to convince people of the existence of a creator who runs the universe and so on and so on. Shall he leave his nephew behind? But Chazal seem to say that, yeah, he should have left him behind. He was a hopeless case, or whatever, and while he was with him, God didn't speak to him. So again, there's a characteristic of good which requires separation. Not every time, not always, not absolute separation, but a characteristic that it requires separation, built right into the creation on the first page. That's a very important principle to know. Yeah.
I have a question. Does this imply that night is, or darkness? First of all, what is darkness? Is it just the absence of light, or is it a subject in itself?
Okay, so in our picture of the world, darkness is not just the absence of light. Darkness is a thing. And that's what it means. Sifsei Chachamim wants to say that that's part of the problem here. You can't have a mixture between a presence and an absence. You can't mix them up so that they interact with one another and produce a third thing. Right? See, you couldn't have had light and darkness mixed together, functioning together, if darkness is just an absence of light. Yeah. It's not a thing that can interact with the light. Right. So he wants to say that that's part of Rashi's understanding that the darkness is a real thing. But the second verse says, Choshech al pnei tehom. Doesn't mean there was no light there. We know there was no light. Verse 3 tells us when light is created. So you don't have to tell me that there was no light there. Yeah.
So it says that with darkness upon the surface of the deep, this is before light was made. Does that mean that darkness existed at a point of time where light wasn't a thing?
That's right.
Darkness. So darkness existed before there was light. Then.
That's right. 100%.
So it existed separated from light.
Again, I'm not quite. Let's just try to put all the logic on the table. Yeah. So there were two suggestions: that darkness is just the absence of light, or darkness is a thing unto itself. Right? Now, if light has not yet been created, then the absence of light is everywhere. So there's certainly going to be darkness. If darkness is just the absence of light, then before light is created, darkness is everywhere. Of course it's going to precede light. If darkness is a separate thing, who knows? Maybe it's created and 6 months later. I mean, who knows when it comes into existence?
I'm saying in here, would it mean that if it's a separate thing, it existed separately from light, before light was made? That's what I'm trying to ask.
But you say two things as if they're equal. One is separately from, and the other was before, and they're not the same thing at all. Two things, one can be created in North Dakota, and one can be created in Seoul, and at the same time, and they're separated from one another.
Mm-hmm.
Being separated and being different in time are not linked.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see why, that comes in.
If it was made before, though, if light didn't exist at this point, when
Yes.
darkness existed, that means it existed independent of light. Separate
That's
from
right.
light. Right. That's what I'm wondering.
But darkness always exists independent of light. No matter what explanation of darkness you give, it's always going to be independent of light.
In the case where light was made, though, and darkness was with it, it didn't exist independent of light at that point, though, right? It existed intertwined until God had a separate.
Yeah, but now the word independent has taken on a new meaning, because if you think that darkness is the absence of light, so then when you block the light, you get darkness. But that's not what we're talking about now, because, as the Sefer Chachamim says, you can't imagine, according to Rashi, a mixture of presence and absence. Those two things can't interact with one another and create a new reality. So that's why it's got to be a thing, and it is a thing. I'll tell you, just has become so far. The picture we have from Amaforshim of the way the world is set up, there are four basic aspects of the world, and they're arranged in concentric spheres. The lowest is earth, on that is water, on that is air, and the highest one is fire. Maimonides says that the word darkness in verse 2 refers to the sphere of fire. Oh yeah? So how come at night when you look up into the sky, you don't see light? It looks black. And the answer is fire doesn't give off light. Burning things give off light. The element of fire doesn't give off light. When you see a fire, let's say a wood fire, it's wood burning. It's the element of fire together with the wood which produces combustion in the wood, which gives off light. That's not the element of fire. The element of fire is utterly dark, meaning it has no light in it whatsoever. So that's that. But then it's an element. It's a thing. Yeah. Yes.
Quickly touch on that. Fire is a destructive force, right? It burns everything. So if we're saying that fire is in darkness, or darkness is in fire, then it must be that darkness, it has an element of destruction or something that is empty or something, right? We say.
Well, here's a tricky point. You say fire is a destructive force. You know what they say? Fire and water are enemies. Either the fire evaporates the water, or the water puts out the fire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Put a pot in between. Then you have something productive,
What does that do?
right? You cook things. You have the fire and the pot and the water in the pot. All of a sudden, it's very productive. Now, you're pointing out that it destroys the wood. That's true. But now, destroying the wood in this way enables you to have chicken soup. So the idea of destructive is a tricky idea. It's got to be put into context. You can't just think in terms of that way. Okay, fine. So that's the Rashi there. Now, the next verse. God called to the light day, the darkness he called night. There's a lot on that, but Rashi didn't talk about it, so I'm going to skip it. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Now you got to be really clever to figure out that there's a problem here. Take a look at, on the next page, verse 8. And there was evening, and there was morning.
Day 2. A second day.
A second day.
Ah.
Look at verse 13 at the bottom of the page. Evening and the morning, third day. What should have happened in day one? It should have been first. How come one?
First it's relative. Second is relative to the first. Third is relative to the second.
Okay, good. I'm going to say this for the recording. He says the words are relative. Second is relative to first because one came before. You can call it second, and third is relative to second. That's very good. But we do have lists very often that start with and go first, second, third, fourth, fifth. There the first is relative to second, and academically, yes, is relative. So the fact that there's another one coming, right? The author of the book knows another one's coming. He writes first, and he prepares you that you should know that another one's coming. Somehow, the description has to be a description of what's on stage, and you can't explain it in terms of something that isn't on stage. Something was on stage, yeah, because that's part of history now, right? That's an attitude that the text is presenting in the simplest, but it's a surprise. No other book would do this. No other book would do this, right? Now let's see what Rashi says. According to the sequence of the language of the chapter, it should have written the first day, as is written regarding the other days, second, third, fourth. Why did Scripture write one? Because the Holy One, blessed be He, was the only one in His world. The angels were not created until the second day. So it is explained in Genesis Rabbah. So here, I think what Rashi's doing is he's using a feature of grammar. Yom echad. Yom is a noun. Echad can also be a noun. Could be used as an adjective, but it could also you can speak of ha-echad, the one. Echad halach, one went this way. So maybe it's not day one, which should have been first day, but day of one. Day belonging to one. One maybe with a capital O. God is one, right? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. It's the Yom of Echad. And that's a way to resolve it, using that grammar to resolve it so that it fits with what's being said, fits with the context, and it communicates something important. And Rashi didn't spell out the grammar. Perhaps he assumes that the Hebrew speakers will know the grammar for themselves. Okay, we're together? Okay, let's go to verse 26. Where am I here? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's read 25 and 26, and then we'll. God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over the animal, the whole earth, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Actually, I think I have 25 here also.
No, it's 26.
Oh, so what happened to that? Okay, fine. So, Right, that's 26. All right, now let's see Rashi. Let us make man. This is God talking. So he's speaking to a group. So it sounds. Even though they, the angels, did not assist him in his creation. So he's inviting them. Seems like he's inviting them to join in the creative process, but they didn't do it, as he will point out. The next verse, 27, says, so God created man in his image. It doesn't say they created man in his image. It says God created man in his image. So on the one hand, you have in 26, God's inviting some group to participate, and in the end, they don't participate. So that has to be understood. And there's an opportunity, listen to this, for the heretics to rebel, to misconstrue the plural as a basis for their heresies. Who would God be talking to but other gods? Like a pantheon. The chief god talking to other gods. And they'll say, you Jews aren't so different from us, and you claim to be monotheists. Your own book belies your statements. Here it is. We. Scripture did not hesitate to teach the proper conduct and the trait of humility that a great person should consult with and receive permission from another one. In other words, this is a very important principle which Rashi and the Chazal use in a number of different cases. You have a choice. You're going to write something, and people who are looking to misread and to push false ideologies into the book will have an opportunity to use the verse to support themselves. But on the other hand, you want to teach something that's valuable. Which way do you go? And in many cases, the answer is, anybody who wants to be mistaken, let him come and be mistaken. We're going to teach this, and the rest of the context and the rest of the logic, if someone will go through it, will see that what he's saying is mistaken. But if he doesn't and he makes a mistake, it's more important for us to teach the idea. A very important example of this, you know very well that when Moses was in Egypt and the plagues took place, every one of the plagues was triggered. No, all but three were triggered by Moses, an action by Moses or Aaron. Now, if you're there and you're part of the Egyptian culture, these guys look like magicians. They have magic powers. Indeed, the first two plagues, the Egyptian magicians could do also. So they look like magicians. Why would God set up a process where a human gesture is the beginning of the divine intervention and lead to the possibility of seeing it as magic? Why would he do it that way? And the answer is because human beings really do have power. They really do have power because God cares about what human beings do. And if certain human beings do something, God will attend to it and follow it up because they are who they are. Tzaddik gozer, v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekayim. The tzaddik makes a decree, that's the way the Chazal talk, and God fulfills it. Indeed, every time the plague stops, it's because Moses prays, and it says, and God did according to what Moses asked. So to teach that human beings really do have power is a very important thing to teach. Of course, you could misconstrue the power. You could think the power belongs to them. No, it's because God cares about them, and is according to God's own principles, wants to respond to the actions that people do, and that's important enough to teach, so as to be prepared to risk the fact that other people will say, really, it was magic. So here, he's saying that we shall make, and because it wants to treat communicate the idea of humility. And, of course, nothing can compare to God. So if God is asking others to participate in the deliberations, in the decision, a person should do that with others as well, as an expression of his humility. Had it been written, I shall make man, we would not have learned that he was speaking with his tribunal, but to himself or his court. And the refutation of the heretics is written alongside it. In the next verse, and God created, does not say they created. So the refutation is there. Sometimes the refutation is in the next book. Sometimes the refutation is a piece of logic. But it's willing to take that chance. Now, Rashi, the next Rashi is based on a very subtle ambiguity. Let's look at it again. 26 again. God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Now, of course, part of the problem is that the word in Hebrew doesn't mean image. It has no visual connotations at all. Maimonides makes this point in the first chapter of the guide. But let's leave that aside for now. I'm just saying that for as a footnote, not to be committed to the wrong understanding here. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule over. So God created man in his image. Now, wait a second. In the previous verse, it says our image, and here it says his image. Now, your helpful friend, the translator, does the job for you. He puts in a capital H. Maybe it shouldn't be a capital H? Maybe the his belongs to man, not God? Maybe that's the shift? Who says? His is singular. So it doesn't obviously refer to what was said back in 26. And now look at Rashi. And God created man. Okay, now here the translator, I should have done a better job on this. The translator, I was really sick yesterday when I did this. In his image, in the form that was made for him, the form that was made for man. It's man's image. He was created in the man image that God wanted him to carry. For everything else was created with a command, whereas man, was created with the hands of God. As it is written, and you placed your hand upon me. Man was made with a die, like a coin, which is made by means of a die, which is called coin in Old French. So the die changes like clay. Okay. So in other words, explains to you the image that was prepared for him was the image and likeness of his creator. So now what he's saying is like this. A tfus. The word tfus in Hebrew, you don't get this from the English form, it's too abstract. A tfus is a let's say you want to cast metal in a certain shape, so you make a shape out of let's say out of wood. You melt the metal into a liquid, and you pour the liquid into the wood, and then the liquid metal will take on the shape of the wood. So that's a form for the molten metal. And he gives a form. So now it says that man was made in a is there a word for that? The thing, huh? Cast. Okay. So man was made in a cast that was prepared for him. Now, that's the 27. God created man in his image. The next words are, in the image of God he created him. So look, if you don't say like Rashi, the verse is saying the same thing twice. If it's a capital H, it's God's image and God's image. Thank you very much. So Rashi says, first of all, it was an image that was made for him, made for man. And you should know that it's the image of God also. Let's explain what that means. But that's how you work out the grammar. Now, how does he do it? He says we have verses which describe God as creating man by using, so to speak, God's hands and using a die. Those using human-like processes to create man. So the description of God's process in making man is a description of a man-like processes. So the creating of man is number one, in a form that God chose man to portray, a form that man should take on, a form that was specified for him. His identity was chosen. And as a matter of fact, that identity is similar to this aspect of the Creator, because the Torah uses, the Tanakh uses those descriptions to describe the way God does it. Now, none of this says that God has arms and legs. None of this says that God, it means that when the Torah says here, God's image, so to speak, and when the Torah says over there that God used his hands and so on and so on, those two things are linked. They're all descriptions of something that's totally non-physical, of course. And there are other verses that say that word for word. Ve'al tidamyuni, Amar Kadosh. To whom can you compare me? If he has hands, he can be compared to a human being who has hands. And the verse, and I think it's Isaiah, says, you can't. I'm incomparable. There's nothing you could say that compares me to anything else. But the way God presents himself in the world, his mode of interacting in the world is a human type mode. Why? Because that's what he chooses to do, says the Ramchal. Doesn't say any limitations on his ability. He has ability to do things in infinite number of ways, but this is what he chooses to do. So but otherwise, Rashi's working here with the non-redundancy in the verse. Man, created man in his image, the image of God he created him, shouldn't say the same thing twice. Now, the last thing I want to tell you today, this is also an important general principle. It says here, in the same verse, 27, male and female, he created them. So now, this business of male and female is very, very complex. Up to here, man is singular, and in the Hebrew, it's Adam, or Ha-Adam. And then male and female created them, so then there's two. So is it one? Is it two? Now, just to make things much worse, take a look at the beginning of chapter 5. This is page 25. One second. Yeah. This is the account of the descendants of Adam on the day in which that God created Adam in the Hebrew. See, the trouble is when they vary the words in English, you don't know there's the same thing. He made him in the likeness of God. Okay. Now, he created them male and female. He blessed them and called their name Adam. Not his name, but their name. Yeah. So it's very complex. Who is this Adam? According to this verse, Adam is a name for male and female together. Okay, so now if we go back to our verse, what's bothering Rashi is you have in one verse the statement that God created man twice, which is singular, and then as male and female, he created them, which is plural. How do you put the two together in one verse? So the Rashi says, further, 221, it's even worse. He took one of his ribs, and then, and of course that's a mistranslation because Rashi doesn't believe it's a rib; it's one side. But all right, he took part of Adam and made it into a woman. So explains that he originally created him with two faces, and afterwards he divided them. Okay, that's an interesting hakara, which I'll talk about maybe tomorrow. The simple meaning, the pshat, is that here Scripture informs you. Oh, they cut off what I gave them. That they were that the two of them were created on the sixth day. It doesn't tell you how they were created. And that was taught to you somewhere else. In other words, Rashi says the lesson here, and this is an extremely important lesson, especially for certain types of critical challenges, that the Torah will tell a story in pieces. It will not always finish the story. It'll start a story and go off on a tangent, or it will tell a story from one point of view and finish from that point of view, and then go back and retell some of the story from a different point of view, explaining different features of the story. And it's not two authors and two different conceptions and two philosophies, and one came from Persia, one came from Rome, and the text does this over and over again. Two creation stories, this is a feature of the biblical text. So here he says, there's a kind of summary statement. This is the sixth day of creation, and this is what happened on the sixth day of creation, and he created, and was in his image and his likeness, and they were male and female, and I'll tell you how later. And that's in 221, where it has the whole description of the creation of Eve. That's an elaboration on what happened here. So that's a very, very important feature. For example, you'll have story which will go like this. A and B were making a business deal, and A paid the money, and B gave him the object, and he went home. The next day, B said to A, well, you told me yesterday that the thing was fresh, and it wasn't fresh, so I'm upset. But didn't say that he told him. Right, didn't say that. But of course, you're supposed to understand the guy's not lying to the guy he's talking to and telling him he said something he didn't say. Of course, from what goes on the second day, you infer that that's what he told him on the first day, and now they have to deal with it. Doesn't have to write it twice. But that means that your description of the first day was incomplete. It left out an important piece of information, which you can only get from day two. So this is the kind of thing that happens in the Torah a lot. When you read at the end of the book of Exodus, at the end of the book of Exodus, when they create the tabernacle, they set it up, and when it's finished, and everything was good, everything was done the appropriate way, and then God's presence filled the tabernacle. You read that, and everything's good. Everything's good. Then you find out, a few chapters later, that on that day, Aaron's two oldest children died because they did something that God didn't want, and God killed them. Because setting it up in a way that it was meant to be set up, and setting it up in a way that it will function for hundreds of years and will be a permanent fixture of the world in its own way, that happened perfectly. And then, yes, there was a human mistake, a human failure, and that was told separately. Just like the story of the Garden of Eden is told separately from the first chapter of Genesis, where you're told the whole story of creation. You read the first chapter of Genesis up to the end of Vayechulu, you would never dream that anything went wrong. because the moral challenge to Adam and Chava, and the fact that they failed, is a separate story. Here, the world is being set up with all its foundations. And God saw it was all very good. And that's one of the reasons some say, is death. So you have to understand that what Rashi is saying here is an extremely important principle, that sometimes the Torah tells you something, and then you see later that it left something out. The one that I like the best is where Yaakov comes to Lavan's area, and he comes to the well, and Rachel's there getting water. He sees her, and of course this is his first cousin, and he's a prophet. Anyway, he goes over to her, and he kisses her, and he tells her who he is, and she runs home, and tells her father, tells the women tell the father, Lavan, and the Torah says like this, and Lavan ran outside to the well to Eliezer, right? The next verse is, and when Lavan saw the jewelry that Yaakov had put on Rachel, and when he heard the words that she said, he went to the well. He was already at the well. Let's try that again. First it says he ran to the well. And then it says when he saw the jewelry, he didn't see the jewelry at the well, he saw the jewelry in the house. That's why he went to the well.
Yeah.
So the Torah tells you, she came home and he ran to the well. Oh, but let me tell you why he ran to the well. See, back in the house before he ran to the well, he saw the jewelry and he heard what she said, and that's why he went to the well. So it's not fully chronological. It tells you one thing, and then it finishes a certain idea, and then it goes back to fill in other things. This is a standard feature of biblical text. So if somebody tells you that there are two stories with two authors, you could tell him that he needs to do some more homework. Yeah.
So the only thing I'm a little confused on is when we say first, he said, let us create him in our image, and then it says he created Adam in his image, right? The first time he was consulting, and then he actually made the man.
Yes. Well, I think the point in Pshat here would be like this. It's very interesting. This is part of another machlekes which we'll come to, B'ez Hashem. There's a verse in Kings that says that Solomon built the temple. Really? He went to Lebanon and cut down the cedar trees. He melted the gold and formed the statues. He wove the tapestries and so on and so on. Well, it means he he was in charge of the project, and he was the one who. So to say that he did something doesn't mean that he moved his hands and fingers and made it happen. Now the same is true the other way around. If the corporation paid its taxes, who signed the check? The treasurer. He signs the checks of the corporation. One person signed the check, but the corporation paid its taxes. So the idea is you've agreed upon a collective action. Now how shall it be carried out? So one can be carrying out the collective action. So I think that's the simple way to explain the pshat. Nasa means, shall we engage in this project? And by the way, the Midrash is replete with advice, what kind of things to do, and some advice the Kodesh Baruch Hu accepted, some didn't accept, and it was a long, complicated process. But then the actual creation, to bring something into existence out of nothing, as the soul of Adam wasn't something that Malachim could do. So, the actual creation process was carried out. But having said Nasa, that shall we do it, that God is, so to speak, acting on behalf of the whole group. But the creation process, this is what we say to the heretics, It's not that there was help in the creation process. It was only consulting. Okay?